you're worthless. You're good for nothing. The reality of this passage is that you are created in the image of God, the Imago Dei. You hold the image of God within you, the capacity, that tiny little spark of goodness that you may say makes us good, but it doesn't, but you still hold this capacity, an image of God. You are loved by God despite your inabilities, despite your misgivings, despite your sin, shame, and guilt. And you can be made right by God through one who was perfect, one who was basically good, one who never followed his heart into a path of deception. And you can be adopted by God. Now, I'm grateful for the stories that I continue to hear of adoption in our church. Right? It's like you talk about it, and then more people, you realize there are adults sitting in the room who were adopted. There are people who, their kids may not talk about it, but they've adopted kids. There are people who are on the journey of adoption. This adoption deal for me and for us as a church just resonates. This truth of, this illustrative truth of adoption, that God adopts me, I was once a sinner and an enemy of God, and now I'm adopted into him. All of this reality, which I've lived for the past 3-4 years, makes this truth so profound in my life. You know, when we started our journey to getting Kai, we've had him home 2 years this month. And our journey of getting him, I would tell people we were adopting him from India, and after they asked why India, they would say, well, kind of the end of the conversation, you're so amazing. You're really doing good. You're really great. You were such a special person. I would get things like that. I'm kind of just, thank you. This is weird. I got to get out of here, right? And a part of me may have believed that too. I'd seen these kids in orphanages, and then I flew across the world. All of this process, all of this work, all of this money, all of this going on, and I flew over there to that orphanage. And I think a part of me felt like I was doing something amazing, something that was really, really good, something that came out of of a desire in me, and it all did, and it was good. But when I walked into that orphanage, I remember coming off of that, the horns blowing, motorcycles passing, cows walking down the road. Just absolute, it just felt, compared to my world, just felt like absolute chaos, dust flying. I walk in that little 2-story, condo deal. Kids, 25 kids all over the place, screaming, yelling, having a good time. Go into this little office, and we're sitting in that office, and we're talking, and they're kind of interviewing us like, you really going to be a good daddy? You really going to be a good mommy? And I remember that moment. When she walked in with that little baby. He didn't know who I was, but I knew who he was. I remember in that moment, all of that, you're amazing, all of that, you're good, all of that, you're doing something amazing for this child, left. And that was my kid. Just as the birth of that firstborn, when I was so scared I didn't know if he was a boy or a girl, all of it gone. This was my kid. I remember the first words I said to him, and I got to hold him first, which is probably, a point of irony at this point. And I said, Appa. That was the language that he had been raised with. That means father. And I remember he just looked at me, because his little eyes, he didn't have glasses at that point, and so he leans back like he needs bifocals and looks at me. In that moment, with all that was going on around me, in that moment, he became bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh, life of my life. And his worth was not determined by the color of his skin or what I had done to get there, the money that had been spent. His worth was simply who he was, as bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh. And the same is true for you and I. Your worth is not determined by your works, but by Jesus' works on the cross. Your worth is not determined by your past sin, your checkered past, your screwed up addiction. That does not say that you are worthless. But the cross says that you are worthy. Don't let some other person, a spouse, a parent, a kid, an enemy, a person at school, tell you that you're not worthy. Don't let a parent's abandonment tell you you're not worthy. For you are worthy. So worthy that Jesus would come and live a life of perfection, die on a cross, and rise from the dead, seated at the right hand of God to proclaim to you that God loves you. And you're worth it. You are worth it. And by the cross, you're good. Not by the works of you or the works of any man, but the man Jesus. The second man, raised from the dead, seated on his throne.